Intense, natural, brooding, charismatic. That was John Garfield. Known for his intense and gritty performances, he had an acting style that set him apart from the more polished Hollywood stars of his era.
Oh, dry up.
His characters were often urban and working class and embodied a sense of disillusionment.
Mr. Davis, give me a pack of cigarettes. Mind the baby. Make mine raspberry. Well, not me, Ma. Understand? Not me. I don't want to end up like Pop.
He arrived in Hollywood in 1937, and for 10 years, he was one of the most charismatic stars on screen. Although extreme typecasting and mishandling of his career potential by his studio Warner Brothers damaged his legacy, viewing the entirety of his filmography, it's easy to see his mass appeal and the potential that was lost in a system that functioned on developing types rather than talent. In this video, I'm going to talk about the career of John Garfield, a Hollywood star and trailblazer who got stuck in the mold of his very first role and for a decade fought to break free. His raw, emotionally charged acting style transformed the movies.
If you ever did to me what I'm doing to you, you know what I do to you? I kill you.
He was the first major screen actor to use the Stanislavski system, an early version of the method, the technique practiced by the group theater. And he had a profound impact on the next generation of young actors. He was Hollywood's original rebel. On October 9, 1938, Warner Brothers released a small, mid-budget family drama titled Four Daughters. Directed by Michael Curtiz and based on a magazine story by popular author Fannie Hurst, the film starred real-life sisters Priscilla, Rosemary, and Lola Lane plus Gail Page as the four musical Limp sisters, daughters of music teacher and widower Adam Limp, played by Claude Rains. The film opens on a cozy domestic scene and trots along as its sweet and charming tale of the trials and tribulations and heartbreak of young love and romance predictably unfolds. And just when we think we've settled into a lightly comedic but rather conventional story,
Something is wrong here.
in walks Mickey Borden.
Come in, Mickey.
He appears at the Limp's front door and demands all of our attention.
Rug on the floor, smell of cooking from the kitchen, piano, and flowers. It's homes like these that are the backbone of the nation. Where's the spinning wheel?
Shut up.
Mickey is moody and brooding, and he's unapologetically urban, and he disrupts the entire film, injecting a cynicism into what had previously been a very light-hearted affair. Mickey's arrival introduces something more tragic and poignant to the story. Besides disrupting the film, he disrupts the Limp family. He so unsettles Priscilla Lane's Anne and May Robeson's Aunt Etta that they don't know what to do with him.
Talking about my tough luck is the only fun I get.
Oh, I'd rather help. I can't cope with him.
Mickey is an outsider, and he resists the pulls of the family to come in. He refuses to tempt fate, so he lacks ambition and direction. And to Anne's dismay, he even struggles to laugh.
I knew I was right. You don't know the first thing about laughter.
Mickey is, of course, played by John Garfield. Four Daughters was his film debut. It's
First
electrifying.
they said let him do without parents. He'll get along. Then they decided he doesn't need any education. That's for sissies. Then right at the beginning they tossed a coin. Heads he's poor, tails he's rich. So they tossed a coin with two heads.
That speech, written by screenwriters Julius Epstein and Leonore Coffey, may as well have been biographical. Garfield, born in 1914 as Jacob Julius Garfinkel, for the entirety of his life, his friends would call him Julie, grew up a poor Jewish kid on New York's Lower East Side. After the death of his mother at the age of 7, he was shuffled between family members. As a teenager, he ran with a pretty rough crowd and caused so much trouble that his father and stepmother enrolled him in a school for troubled youth. It was at this school, PS 45, through the influence of the school's principal, Angelo Patri, that he was introduced to acting and the theater. He made his Broadway debut in 1932, and in 1934 he joined the groundbreaking group theater. It was because of the group theater that he would end up in Hollywood. The group theater was a groundbreaking New York theater collective founded in 1931 by Harold Clurman, Cheryl Crawford, and Lee Strasberg. It was a community of actors, directors, and writers dedicated to producing socially relevant plays that reflected the struggles of working-class Americans during the Great Depression. The theater's use of ensemble acting and intense, emotionally honest performances influenced the development of the method style of acting. And on November 4th, 1937, the group's play, Golden Boy, opened on Broadway. Golden Boy is the rise and fall story of Joe Bonaparte, a young, gifted violinist who is torn between pursuing a career in music and earning vast wealth and fame as a prizefighter. The play explored the themes of ambition, sacrifice, and identity in the pursuit of the American dream, and it tackled head-on the corrosive nature of capitalism and materialism, and how both could corrupt and destroy art and the artist. As he was writing, Clifford Odets crafted the lead characters of Joe Bonaparte and Lorna Moon with his friends and group theater members Julie Garfield and Phoebe Brand in mind to play the leads. When Golden Boy was announced, Julie was 8 months into the run of the hit Broadway play Having a Wonderful Time. The comedy, set at an adult summer camp in the Catskills, received rave reviews and was an audience favorite, and Julie was its breakout star. And it was on the promise of the role of Joe that he left the cast of Having a Wonderful Time. But on opening night, the roles of Joe and Lorna were played by Lou Adler and Hollywood import Frances Farmer. Julie and Phoebe were cast in the supporting roles of Anna and Siggy, Joe's sister and brother-in-law. Ultimately, Golden Boy was one of the group theater's most successful productions, and it made enough money to support the company for the next 2 seasons. But to be passed over for the role of Joe broke Julie's heart. It felt like a betrayal. Actually, it was a betrayal. By the end of the play's run, the formerly tight-knit group was fracturing as a result of philosophical disagreements, infighting, and controversy over bringing in Hollywood stars like Frances Farmer to headline productions and boost ticket sales over casting current group members. So when Warner Brothers Studio came calling with the offer of a Hollywood contract, 24-year-old Jules Garfield began to see his future out west. He had a wife, Roberta, and a baby on the way, and a studio contract offered steady pay and the chance, maybe it was a 1 in a million chance, but it was still a chance, to be a movie star. In a lecture he gave on film acting at the Actors Laboratory, a Hollywood offshoot of the group theater, in December of 1945, Garfield said of 4 daughters, "I was very frightened and very upset because I didn't like the script or the part. I worked very hard the way I would on a play, and I was baffled by the set. That was a colorful part, and I'm not being modest in saying that any actor would have made the same hit. It was that kind of thing. I didn't know what I'd done, and I wanted to go to New York. In New York, when I heard about the reviews and that I was a star, I was amazed." And the reviews were unanimous in their praise for his performance. The New York Times named 4 Daughters one of the year's 10 best films. The National Board of Review named Garfield as one of the year's best actors. The reviews also give us a glimpse at the real sensation Mickey Borden and John Garfield caused. The Winnipeg Tribune said perhaps the greatest single occurrence having to do with 4 Daughters is a brilliant debut of John Garfield. Besides naming the film one of the year's best, the New York Times also went on to say, Mickey Borden, as portrayed by John Garfield, bites off his lines with a delivery so eloquent that we still aren't sure whether it's the dialogue or Mr. Garfield, who is so bitterly brilliant. And the Oklahoma News just had this amazing review. The entrance of Mickey Borden is as unexpected and as astounding as would be a sermon on the devil, predestination, or witchcraft at a transcendentalist soiree. And the review ends with a very prescient statement. May the fates and the Warner Brothers be kind to him in Hollywood and give him the roles he deserves. For his performance as Mickey Borden, Garfield was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. But as early as 1938, Garfield could tell which way the wind was blowing. He was being hailed as the new and better James Cagney and Paul Muni. In an interview with Sheila Graham, published in September of 1938, he said, almost as if predicting his future, "I don't want to be a star until I have as much power as a star in regards to the parts I play. If I let them, they'll rush me from picture to picture, whether or not the parts are good for me." And sadly, he wasn't wrong. his films at Warner Brothers exploited elements of his background and blended it with the characteristics of both Mickey Borden and Joe Bonaparte. In a way, Garfield's early screen persona, the guy with the chip on his shoulder, the guy who wanted to find a quick way to success, only to find himself on the run, in jail, on a work farm, or on his way to the electric chair. But Garfield's tough guys were also vulnerable and sensitive, even though later these roles would be seen as groundbreaking and would have a lasting impact on the film industry. He was already tired of them. "I hope they don't give me any more prison pictures," he said in a 1940 article. Instead of Men on the Run, he wanted to play Nijinsky. He received another blow in 1939, when Columbia studio boss Harry Cohn asked Jack Warner to loan him out for their screen adaptation of Golden Boy. Garfield was Cohn's first choice for the role of Joe Bonaparte. But because of an ongoing feud between Jack Warner and Harry Cohn, Jack was angry with Harry for giving the first Irving Thalberg Award to Daryl Zanuck, #petty, but as a result of the drama, he'd missed his chance to play Joe Bonaparte. The role went to a very, very young and very green and not so very urban William Holden.
Tell your Mr. Moody I'll dazzle the eyes out of his head. Tell him for me he's handling the next world's champ.
Later, Julie told Robert Blake that missing out on playing Joe Bonaparte on screen was the biggest heartbreak of his life. So in 1939, instead of playing Joe Bonaparte in Golden Boy, he played a kind of multiverse version of Mickey Borden, renamed Gabriel Lopez, in the 1939 film Daughters Courageous. Although the film reteamed him with director Michael Curtiz and the Lane sisters plus Gail Page, along with Claude Rains, Jeffrey Lynn, and the rest of the original cast of Four Daughters in very similar roles, Daughters Courageous was not a direct sequel to Four Daughters. Those would come later. But there were a few roles that gave him the opportunity to break out from that Borden-Bonaparte mold to varying degrees of success. In the film Juarez, he was totally miscast as the general and future Mexican president Porfirio Diaz. The film might have been a flop, but it gave him the chance to work with Paul Muni and Bette Davis, so it was a personal win. In Saturday's Children, he gives one of my favorite performances as the bespectacled and nerdy accountant, yes, accountant, and amateur inventor Rims Rawson. What a great name for an accountant.
That's Rims Rawson. He never looks where he's going. Eccentric.
I'll say.
Directed by Vince Sherman and based on a play by Maxwell Anderson, Saturday's Children, like Juarez, is a departure from the tough guy, hard luck, fast-talking characters Garfield usually played.
I used to live in a Spanish neighborhood, and the storekeepers would swear at me in Spanish, so little by little I picked up the language.
Saturday's Children was initially set to co-star him for the fourth time with Priscilla Lane. But Garfield personally asked for Anne Shirley to be cast in the role of his love interest, Bobby. Claude Rains was already cast as the father, and Garfield was legitimately concerned that if Priscilla co-starred, the studio might also find roles for her sisters, plus Gail Page, in an effort to turn the film from Saturday's Children into Saturday's Daughters. And it's really a lovely little film that follows the relationship of Bobby and Rims, who meet at work and fall in love. And even though Bobby's not interested in becoming a wife,
You've known each other quite a while now. You should have had him ready to propose.
Why does he have to propose? I never proposed. I'm married.
she falls for Rims. And Rims has plans to take off to the Philippines to work on a rubber farm and invent things.
You remember that job I told you about the Philippines? Well, it's come through. How do you like that?
To get Rims to marry her, instead of pursuing his dream job, Bobby uses some very sneaky tactics suggested by her sister Florrie.
If you knew just half a dozen sentences to say that would make him propose to you tonight, would you say them?
No, I wouldn't.
What kind of sentences?
The two get married, and even though they love each other, they face some devastating financial obstacles that strain and pressure their marriage.
But where the husband is already working, the wife should be let out.
Oh, I see.
Saturday's Children was a project Garfield desperately wanted to do. Rims is shy and gentle with a warm sensitivity and a relatable awkwardness that forces a dramatic recalibration of the audience's expectations of a John Garfield movie. A quality of childlike innocence and vulnerability remains to Rims, a side of Julie's persona that never again would be so fully exploited on screen. According to screenwriters Julius and Philip Epstein, the character of Rems Rawson was the closest a character ever got to the real-life Julie. Rems Rawson and Porfirio Diaz were the types of characters he wanted to play. He always maintained at heart that he was a character actor that got lucky. He told critic Archer Winston, "You know, I'm not the kind of actor that becomes a star in Hollywood. I would normally have been a character actor, but Mike Curtiz made me a star in Four Daughters, my first picture. He gave me that screen personality that carried me to stardom." Sadly, Saturday's Children failed to find an audience. Had the film been a hit, he might have moved beyond the established formula Warner's had created for him. Garfield had his own ideas about what kind of material he wanted to do, and was always pitching picture suggestions to the front office that he said went in one ear and out the other. He had ideas for a screen version of Clifford Odets' Waiting for Lefty, or Dalton Trumbo's anti-war novel Johnny Got His Gun. Works that had something socially important to say. But instead of making socially relevant material, he made Flowing Gold, a mid-tier oil-filled adventure film that reteamed him with his Broadway Golden Boy co-star Frances Farmer. And then he was off playing another small-town hood in East of the River. And it was here that he rebelled, missing lines, calling in sick, and doing the least amount of acting he could get away with.
That's over now. Don't you see, you ain't his kind of people, you're my kind.
In a private meeting, Jack Warner told him, "The public doesn't want to pay to see John Garfield as Rems Rawson. The public pays for John Garfield as Mickey Borden, and any other variation of Mickey Borden, Johnny Bradfield, Tommy Gordon, Gabriel Lopez." And while Warner's was content to put Garfield in more jailbird pictures, the critics and the fan magazines were taking note. Modern Screen, in the 1940 article about the travails of young stars in Hollywood, wrote, "John Garfield has been a jailbird in the last 6 of his 7 films."
Oh, John Garfield?
Yes.
Oh, certainly. I've known Johnny for years.
You have?
Uh-huh.
But tell me, is he really that tough?
Tough? Oh, Don Wilson. John Garfield is the sweetest, mildest, gentlest boy you'd ever want to meet in the whole world.
Really?
Sure.
That's so you'll act right when he gets here.
Joe! Don't do it, Joe!
Why did you want to carry a gun?
To shoot people with, sweetheart.
But one professional bright spot did appear: the Seawolf. Film reteamed him with his favorite director, Michael Curtiz, and he had the opportunity to co-star with Ida Lupino and Edward G. Robinson. Garfield plays George Leach. He's still a man on a run, but this is a period adventure story set on the high seas, with a strong and nuanced screenplay by Robert Rawson and breathtaking cinematography by James Wong Howe. The Seawolf was a hit.
We won't come back till it's over there.
The sweetheart of the U.S.
As a result of contracting scarlet fever as a child, Garfield was classified 4F, making him unfit for military service. Instead of donning a uniform, he dedicated himself to war work, tirelessly entertaining troops and co-founding the Hollywood Canteen with Betty Davis.
If you've ever been to Hollywood, one thing you're sure to remember is this converted barn in the heart of the city. Here, under the leadership of Betty Davis and John Garfield, all the guilds and unions in Hollywood have collaborated in creating and maintaining the Hollywood Canteen.
The canteen was staffed by Hollywood celebrities who served coffee and donuts and danced with the service members. Garfield was heavily involved in organizing talent and events at the canteen, volunteering his time as a host and performer.
The whole motion picture industry pitched in to help.
He was a committed Roosevelt Democrat and was honored to meet with the president during the war in recognition of his support of the troops. It was no secret in Hollywood, Garfield was a liberal, and there wasn't a petition he wouldn't sign in aid of a liberal cause. During the war years, his film output dwindled to a trickle, with only 6 films released between 1942 and 1945. The Fallen Sparrow is an interesting film. It's a B picture, and fun fact, fans of Val Lewton will recognize a lot of the sets. The Fallen Sparrow allowed Garfield to play a different role in a different type of film. Here, he's Kit McKittredge, a wealthy young man who is also a veteran of the Spanish Civil War. He's escaped Nazi captivity and torture, but he bears both physical and psychological scars from the experience.
Drag of that foot. When that came, you knew they'd come in and take you upstairs and beat you up and do their little tricks.
He becomes involved in a conspiracy that centers around the murder of his best friend, the New York City war refugee community, a family standard, and a mysterious woman played by Maureen O'Hara. Despite the very, very, very convoluted plot, Garfield's performance is riveting and conveys the character's physical pain and emotional turmoil, demonstrating his range as an actor.
I never felt better in my life. Scars all healed, weigh what I should, eat well, sleep well. Steady as a rock.
In the same year, Garfield also starred in Howard Hawks' wartime masterpiece, Air Force, as a part of an impressive ensemble cast that included Harry Carey, John Ridgely, George Tobias, Gig Young, Arthur Kennedy, and James Brown as Tex Rader, one of the best pilot names in the movies. Air Force is a gripping, action-packed tale about the tight-knit crew of the bomber Marianne, set in the immediate aftermath of the attack on Pearl Harbor. It was one of the biggest box office hits of the year. In 1945, he would star in another smash hit, The Pride of the Marines, directed by Delmer Daves from a screenplay by Alva Bessie and Albert Maltz. The film tells the true story of Marine Al Schmid, blinded in action on Guadalcanal.
One card. I may be blind, but I know where the phone is in this house. Call him a cab.
Garfield had read about Schmid in a Life magazine article and went to visit him in his rehabilitation center. He even spent several weeks living with the Schmid family to better understand the role. The movie was another huge hit for Warner Brothers, and as the war came to an end, so did John Garfield's contract, and he had no intention of renewing it. In the late summer of 1945, with only a few months left on his contract, John Garfield was at MGM filming The Postman Always Rings Twice, co-starring Lana Turner. Adapted from the novel by James M. Cain and directed by Tay Garnett, Postman is a classic film noir that tells the story of Frank Chambers, a drifter who stops at a roadside restaurant and begins an affair with the owner's wife, Cora, and planned to kill Cora's husband. However, their plans go awry, and they find themselves caught in a web of deceit, betrayal, and murder. Postman is arguably Garfield's best-known film, the one most casual classic film viewers can name. Frank Chambers is a familiar Garfield character, a tough and brooding anti-hero. Frank is a streetwise and cynical character.
I could sell anything to anybody.
Unlike Garfield's earlier roles, Frank, although reluctant at first, is a true criminal who is willing to commit murder for personal gain.
They hang you for a thing like
But not if we do it right, and you're smart, Frank. You'll think of a way.
Frank's emotional life is more complex, as he struggles with conflicting desires and motivations in his relationship with Cora. Frank is also more introspective and vulnerable, with moments of doubt. The chemistry between John Garfield and Lana Turner is dynamite. It's characterized by intense attraction, simmering tension, and a sense of forbidden desire. The critics and audiences couldn't get enough of this sordid tale of love, murder, and fate. It was one of the top 10 films of 1946. Postman was scheduled to wrap production by November, but filming was delayed, and those delays cut into the scheduled start time of his final film under contract with Warner Brothers, Humoresque.
This is the story of three loves, three violent and demanding loves, that weave a tangled pattern through the lives of three people.
Despite his eagerness to be done with the studio, Humoresque was a project Garfield was willing to extend his contract end date for. Based on the novel by Four Daughters author Fannie Hurst, directed by Jean Negulesco with a screenplay by Clifford Odets and Zachary Gold. And let's just say Odets was really trying to make amends. If Julie was never going to get the chance to play Joe Bonaparte on screen, he'd get pretty close with Humoresque's Paul Bourret.
What do? You a prize fighter? You look just like a prize fighter. Monty, I bet he's a prize fighter.
I play the violin.
Like Joe, Paul is a violin prodigy who lives over his family's grocery store. But Paul's not torn between music and prize fighting. He's torn between his dedication to his art and letting himself be overwhelmed by love. Ultimately, he realizes that he cannot be committed fully to both. It's one or the other. Both Golden Boy and Humoresque are Depression-era stories, and the economic pressures of the era play a pivotal role in shaping the choices and the family dynamics of both stories.
I don't want to feel like a heel every time I eat a piece of bread in my own house. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life living in a hot box over a grocery store.
Joan Crawford's Helen Wright begins her relationship with Paul as his artistic benefactor, but soon that evolves into a tumultuous affair rife with conflicting emotions and jealousy and heartbreak.
I'd like to slap your face.
Why don't you try it?
Much to the dismay of Paul's mother, played by fellow group theater alum Ruth Nelson. Paul's friend, Sid, played by the great Oscar Levant, tells him,
"You're a sincere kid, but you're suffering from the old American itch. You want to get there fast, and you don't want to pay for the ride."
Ultimately, the film suggests that success and wealth can come at great personal cost, and that the pursuit of these things can sometimes lead to a sense of emptiness and disillusionment.
Nothing comes free. One way or another, you pay for what you are.
Humoresque, of course, is top-tier melodrama. A love story with extremely heightened passions and emotions, with a soaring classical score arranged by Franz Waxman. All of it makes for a dizzyingly intense experience. You either love this one or you hate it. Audiences in 1946 loved it. It's only fitting that Garfield closed out his Warner Brothers contract playing a classical musician in an adaptation of a Fannie Hurst novel. It's how it all started. In a kind of exit survey of Garfield's Warner Brothers career, columnist Ed Sullivan summed up his 9 years under contract rather bluntly. 9 years ago, Garfield, then 25, created a stir in the cinema by his role of a frustrated guy in Four Daughters. In the passage of 9 years, instead of becoming one of the fine, rounded actors of his profession, mishandled Garfield has become a soap opera of celluloid. John Garfield left Warner Brothers for his own production company. For his first post-Warner's project, John Garfield exchanged the violin for boxing gloves. Widely regarded as one of the best boxing movies of all time, Garfield, in an Oscar-nominated performance, plays Charlie Davis, an amateur boxer who catches the eye of a major boxing promoter. As he rises through the ranks to become champion, Charlie is tempted by money and women and fame. At first, he willingly trades his integrity.
I can't stop now. I can't throw it all away. It's what we wanted.
For all the luxuries that come with being the champ. But when the corrupt system turns its eye on him, he has one last chance to regain his self-respect. It's interesting to note that in a career spent playing New York toughs and urban wise guys, Body and Soul's Charlie Davis was the first time, outside of his brief appearance in friend and former group theater member Elia Kazan's Gentleman's Agreement, that he played a Jewish character. He'd been Italian, Irish, Polish, and Mexican, but never had his Jewishness been explicitly seen on screen.
Over in Europe, the Nazis are killing people like us just because of their religion. But here, Charlie Davis is champion.
The casting of Canada Lee in the pivotal role of Ben Chaplin was also groundbreaking. Ben becomes Charlie's loyal friend and trainer who acts as his conscience.
What are you ducking out on, Charlie? You can be on top for years yet.
Charlie Davis is another character like Paul Bourret and Joe Bonaparte. In all of these cases, conflicts and struggles revolve around professional ambitions, moral values, and the destructive desire for material success. And Charlie, well, his ending is ambiguous, but his final lines are hard truth.
Everybody dies.
As 1947 turned to 48, Julie was riding the wave of accolades for Body and Soul, and he returned to Broadway. But in the fall of 1947, ominous signals were coming from Washington.
Calling the House Un-American Activities Committee to order, Chairman J. Parnell Thomas of New Jersey opens an inquiry into possible communist penetration of the Hollywood film industry.
Cold War hysteria was at its peak, and the House Un-American Activities Committee were laser-focused on rooting out Reds in Hollywood. I'm a Rooseveltian New Dealer. The trouble is liberalism is unpopular today, and anybody who is for the underdog gets labeled a red. Julie and others with liberal views, communist or not, were in the committee's crosshairs. All those petitions he'd signed, his open pride at being a Roosevelt Democrat, as well as his working and personal relationships with the group theater, prompted the committee to label him at worst a communist and at the very least a sympathizer. Julie was not a communist. He'd never been a member of the Communist Party, but his wife Roberta was. And it was only a matter of time before Julie would be called before the committee. But before that happened, he made Force of Evil. The story follows Garfield's corrupt lawyer, Joe Morse, who finds himself torn between his brother and his plan with the ruthless mob boss he works for to consolidate New York City's numbers racket. The only hitch in that plan is Joe's brother, Leo.
Stop now, Joe. Because I'm getting old and old people die, and there'll be nobody to cry for you.
Written and directed by Abram Polanski, Force of Evil is an explicitly anti-capitalist film. Garfield's Joe Morse and his associates are driven by their pursuit of wealth and power at the expense of the working class people they exploit. In Force of Evil, the system is rigged and the numbers racket is fixed.
Don't you take the nickels and dimes and pennies from people who bet just like every other crook, big or little, in this racket? They call this racket policy because people bet their nickels on numbers instead of paying their weekly insurance premium.
Although Force of Evil is recognized as a classic noir today, it was as big a flop as Body and Soul was a hit. Julie went to Washington to testify in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He was the second star to be questioned under oath after Sterling Hayden. He was also the biggest star to come before the committee.
Question is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
They asked him if there were communists in the group theater. He said no. They asked him why he left New York for Hollywood. He explained the Golden Boy drama. He told the committee he knew of no communists in Hollywood, and he told them he was not and had never been a communist. He was a proud American and a committed liberal and a Roosevelt Democrat. The committee did not clear him. Some members even suggested that the FBI look into his testimony to see if he'd perjured himself. His testimony, along with being named a communist in Red Channels, a magazine that took it upon itself to name Hollywood actors, writers, directors, and others as communists, it had a disastrous effect on his next film, The Breaking Point. Julie had returned to Warner Brothers. Everyone involved with The Breaking Point felt it was destined to be an unstoppable hit. Directed by Michael Curtiz and based on the story To Have and Have Not by Ernest Hemingway, The Breaking Point was an intense and thrilling story of a struggling fishing boat captain who gets involved in illegal activities to provide for his family, but finds himself in over his head when a smuggling job goes wrong. But with his committee testimony and the accusation in Red Channels, Warner's never extended the offer of the second film, and they quietly released, then quickly withdrew The Breaking Point from theaters, and Julie's phone stopped ringing. With no offers for film or television work, and the mounting stress of the entire situation began to take its toll. He was able to find work on a low-budget independent film put together by his production partner, Bob Roberts, called He Ran All the Way. He plays Nick Roby, a petty criminal who, after a botched robbery, takes a family hostage to hide out, and gradually descends into paranoia and desperation as the police close in on him. After filming He Ran All the Way, Julie was despondent at not being able to work. In 1952, in the midst of the stress and the anger and the upset and the disappointment and the loss, he turned to the role that was his missed opportunity. The role that gave him the biggest professional disappointment of his life. The role written for him. He returned to Joe Bonaparte. He produced a new stage version of the show. After 15 years, Julie took to the stage in Golden Boy.
You can't get even with people by playing the fiddle. If music shot bullets, I'd like it better. Artists and freaks like that, well, they're considered freaks by people today. And the world moves fast, and they just sit around like forgotten dopes. You have to be what you are.
Julie once told Montgomery Clift that he admired him for not signing a long-term studio contract because he felt he'd signed his life over to Warner Brothers. He'd been a major star for 10 years. He'd revolutionized screen acting. And then, overnight, it had all gone away. For Julie and so many others, the dream of stardom was a double-edged sword. It provided fame and fortune, but at the cost of artistic freedom and growth. And just as he was able to break free from those confines and recalibrate his career in the direction he wanted it to go, with serious stage work and films that had something honest to say about society and the human condition, the blacklist derailed him. He'd never been a communist, and although his wife and lots of his friends were, he never named names, and it cost him dearly. Had he done so, the committee would have cleared him to work, but that was a price he was unwilling to pay.
You pay for what you are.
John Garfield died of a heart attack on May 21st, 1952. There are 8 million stories in the cinema cities. This has been one.